Why, howdy guys. Rex here. I got the missus in the back seat and she's giggling pretty hard because on the first take I almost flew off into a ravine, which would have been great because I would have been talking about God's first commandment as I checked out of this life. That would not be a bad way to go, flying into a ravine, talking about God's commandments. Yeah, we're driving through the Black Hills at the moment, and as you know, in August in the Black Hills, it does get a little bit western on the roads. So here we go. Number one, I want to talk about this. It's important to realize the context. So if you haven't seen the videos preceding this, go ahead and watch those first. The context is actually that the 10 Commandments were not originally just written down on stone. They were actually conveyed verbally to the entire nation of Israel from Jabal al-Lawz, Mount Sinai, okay, which is in the land of Midian in present-day Saudi Arabia. And actually, that mountain is still there. You can go look at it. You can't look at it now. There's a big radar base on top of it, and it's very, very... they actually secured it as an archaeological site once they discovered it a few years back. But the entire mountain had a giant fireball descend down upon this. You can read this in Exodus 19, the chapter preceding Exodus 20. And there was such a loud voice. It was like the voice of 8 trillion trumpets, okay? It was so exceedingly loud, and the people were commanded to come up to the mountain to hear what God had to say. And they were so scared they couldn't handle it. So right off the bat, after God delivers these 10 commandments verbally, so all the nation heard it. It's not like Moses went up there and just carved it on a rock and came back down and tricked everybody. They were yelled down on the ultimate PA system from the sky, from a fireball that descended down on top of the mountain and actually barbecued all the rocks, okay? And it was so loud it was shaking the ground. And it was so scary that nobody wanted to really hear God speak anymore. And this is one of the times people often wonder, why doesn't God speak to us? Well, because we asked him not to. We appointed Moses at that point to say, hey, Moses, man, you go talk to him. We're too scared, because if we hear him again or if we have to see him, we're going to die for sure. It's too scary. And so that's the context. So these are actually being shouted down to a few million people at the base of Mount Sinai, okay? The real one, not the one in the Sinai Peninsula. That's Constantine Mommy's religious holy sites he designated. It's not the historical site. But if you go there today, you'll see a giant Hebrew camp at the bottom of that mountain. It has 12 wells all around it, big old lake bed that's dried up now. And you can even see the rock that Moses split in half. It's several stories tall. Very interesting history and archaeology. You can even see the actual altar where later they had the golden calf on there, where they have all the calf paintings and stuff on the altar. And so it's kind of an interesting spot. Very, very cool. So we're going to start off with the first commandment. This is the most important one. Mind you, this was being yelled extremely loudly down from the mountain from a fireball, okay? So Exodus chapter 20 verse 1 says, and God spake all these things, saying, speaking it. And you go into verse 2, it says, I am, in the English, the Lord thy God, the one who brought you out of Egypt, out of the hands of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay? Now that's the English version. Pretty straightforward. So number one, he is saying, I am the Lord thy God. In the original language, he wasn't saying it in 1611 English. He was saying it in Hebrew back in them days, okay? He said, I am, and he specifically gives his name. When it's all capitals, L-O-R-D, in the old Bibles, like in the old King James Bibles, for example, that is in the original document the actual name of God, his name. He has a name. His name is not God. God is just a title, okay? Lord is just a title. Like lieutenant, like colonel is a title. It's not a name of a dude, okay? So when he says, I am the Lord thy God, seems a little redundant in the English, right? But he's actually specifically identifying his name. There's a reason for that. And the reason is they just come out of Egypt where there's like 8,000 different gods to choose from. So he was specifically identifying himself as a particular God that did particular exact things. Later on in the Commandments, he'll further identify his authority and his kingdom and his dominion. But right now he's just saying he's making it simple because they just escaped Pharaoh by going through the Red Sea, and God destroyed the entire Egyptian army in the Gulf of Aqaba by crashing the water down on their heads. And he can even still find the chariot wheels and axles encrusted in coral at the bottom of the Gulf of Aqaba right now. The Karolinski Institute in Sweden, they went down their submarines, and there's videotape, and they made documentaries on it. Like, there's probably 10 documentaries where you can actually look at the video footage of all the horse bones, axles, 8th dynasty chariot wheels from Egypt. Very interesting, all just strewn about the bottom of the Red Sea. I think that would be on the news more than it was. It was on the news for a very short time back when they first discovered it in the early 80s. Nobody talked about it since then. But so, commandment number 1, I am, specifically Yod, He, Vav, He are the 4 Hebrew letters that make up his name. A lot of people pronounce that differently, okay? A lot of people would pronounce that Yahweh, right? That's a very common pronunciation of those 4 letters. In the King James, it'll give you the name Jehovah, okay? Mind you, there's no J sound really in Hebrew. There's no J letter. So like Jesus and Jehovah, there's no J. Those would be pronounced as Y, kind of like if you go to Europe, Americans don't understand this, but if you go other places in the world, J's are very, very, very commonly, usually pronounced as Y's. Like Jaeger would really be Jaeger, right? Like in German or whatever, right? And so if you look at that, he is saying, I am Yehovah, thy Elohim, your God. So he's given himself a name. Before that, he said, I am who I am. Don't worry about it for now, Moses. Just go and get my people out of Egypt. Bring them to the mountain, and I'll explain what they need to do so that they can be in communion with me, right? And we can do our stuff. And so he's identifying himself. I am Yehovah, thy Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt. So he's specifically saying, I'm that God that brought you out of Egypt. I'm not some other God from some different area. Because there are a bunch of smaller other gods out there, probably fallen angels or who knows what, or made up stuff, right, that magicians came up with, or, mythologies. Okay, so there's a lot of small g gods out there. He's specifically identifying himself as the one that brought him out of Egypt, and also out of the house of bondage. He's the one that freed them from slavery, rescued them. For 400 years they were in slavery in Egypt, okay? There's a lot of typology in there, man. Think about it. Because he rescues us from our slavery to sin as well, right? And he rescues us from the slavery of this world at some point, right? So he's really talking to everybody who wants to be rescued from slavery. He's identifying one of his character traits as well. So I am Yehovah, thy Elohim, the one who saved you from Egypt and brought you out of there, and the one who saved you from the house of bondage. You are no longer in chains. You're free. You can now leave, okay? And then he says the last part. You shall not have any other gods before me. Okay? None. Zero. Now, what does that mean, before me? Like, does that mean that you can have other gods as long as they're after him? No, that's not really the proper understanding of the terminology. If you look at the word before me, you can look it up in Strong's Concordance, or if you have the original Torah, you can look it up, the original book of Exodus, and it's the word panim, okay? Which means basically in front of you, in one's face, like around you, in your presence. So he's saying, you ain't gonna have any other gods in front of me, before me, in my face, in my presence, nothing. I don't want to see them. I don't want to hear about them. You're abandoning them. You are now married to me, okay? Pretty straightforward. So commandment number 1, I am Yehovah, thy Elohim, the one who brought you out of Egypt, and the one who saved you from the house of bondage, and you ain't gonna have any other gods in my face. Powerful. Is that something we do nowadays? Or do we kind of sneak extra gods into his face once in a while? A lot of guys expound on this in certain areas that are true. There's a lot of other gods that we can have in his face. One of them is ourselves. That's a big deal if we're, suffering from vanity or thinking we're the coolest guy on the block. That could be a false god, right? Looking into the mirror, okay? Another false god could be your pocketbook, or your money, or your wealth, or your position, or your education, or something like that, okay? But what he's specifically referring to when he's talking about these other gods, these other authorities, these other powers, and these other religious traditions and sets of information. So when this particular God downloads his information into us via his instructions, which are known in the English as the law, right? He gives us his instructions. That's a new operating system that our brain can operate on, which gives us a healthier way of life, makes us live longer, has a better society, and more civilized nature and all that kind of stuff, okay? Compared to how it used to be back in the day, where it was ridiculously crazy, like Mad Max, Fury Road, except worse, combined with Conan the Barbarian type stuff, right? And so he wants us to have his operating system. If we bring other gods around, like Molech, or like Ishtar, or whoever, right? Or Zeus, doesn't matter, or, the bird god from Egypt. I don't even remember all that. And we probably shouldn't even mention their names. We shouldn't even bring it before him. In fact, it says later in the Bible, I don't even want to hear their names coming out of your mouth. I don't ever want to hear you even saying who they are. I don't want to hear about it at all. He didn't like it very much. So he's specifically protecting us from the twisted, sick, crazy ideology of some of these other gods, most of which are really bad freaking news, okay? They usually required, like, baby sacrifices, or he had to, like, burn people alive in order to learn stuff. And, I mean, like, they have to cut out hearts on top of pyramids, the whole 9 yards, right? Whereas they're trying to emulate something that, all basic nations, I think, understood the idea that for atonement for sins, there has to be a payment for that, right? But their mode of payment was not the right one. They're using the wrong currency. And when they use the wrong currency, they keep putting counterfeit pennies in the slot machine, and it ain't taking them. So how many hearts can you cut out on top of a pyramid before you figure out that that's not good, and you're just hurting a lot of people? When you can just wait for the one exact special coin to come that is supposed to come, which was first articulated, the idea, before the mountain of laws in the Passover, okay? The Passover lamb was done to atone for sins of the family, and that's kind of the model that he wanted to use. And so if we have all these other gods that are not the right operating system, they usually get perverted and twisted, and they end up being like bad news. All right, pretty simple, man. He's a specific God. You don't just say God in general. He is a very specific God, okay? And you're not going to have any other gods in front of his face. He doesn't even want to hear about them. Commandment number 1. Pretty simple. I know a lot of us might not like that part, especially when certain times of the year roll around, where it's very, very fun and traditional to bring these other gods out from the closet from way back in Babylon and Egypt and parade them around and say, Lord, look at what we found. We found a statue of Molech. Look, it's Nimrod's phallic symbol. We're going to hang decorations on it. He doesn't like that stuff. Okay? First commandment. Pretty easy stuff. All right. On the next one, we're going to cover the very scary second commandment.